Hi, I'm Andrew Wasson. Thanks for tuning in to my weekly guitar blog. It's November 4th, 2012, and this week we're going to discuss ways of mapping the guitar neck. Now, this question was sent from Trevor. He's out in Melbourne, Australia, and he wrote in asking, Andrew, I was wondering if you had any suggestions or tips for learning the scales in much more of a horizontal way. I'm a guitar player who has been studying the scales for quite a while, but exclusively in position. The next thing I think I need to do is learn how they map out more along the guitar neck. Thanks for doing your weekly guitar videos. They help tons. From Trevor in Melbourne, Australia. Well, thanks for writing in, Trevor. Scales are one of the most important tasks that we undertake when we're studying the guitar. So how well we learn them both in position and along the fingerboard are a huge part of how well we will eventually put them to use. Now, once the initial in-position patterns are fairly well developed, an excellent next step to take with your scales is to start learning them much more horizontally along the neck. Now, generally when I teach this topic, I let my students go to work and just limit the string sets that they're going to be mapping in order to keep the initial horizontal scale work being done a little less overwhelming. Now, let's take a look at how this approach can be done, starting with a few neck diagrams.
Well, to start with this whole idea of mapping scales on the guitar fretboard, what you'll want to do is begin with a couple of common shapes that are very well known to you. I happen to take a shape here in A minor that is just operating from the 7th fret of the 4th string as a root note of A headed to an octave of A at the 5th fret of the 1st string. This is a fairly common shape. It's just the upper half. I'm just operating on the top 4 strings essentially with this shape. But we're going to go along the neck with another shape in my next example diagram, and then we're going to look at mapping between them. So here's our first shape. Let's head to the next shape we're going to organize. Now what I've done is I've moved up the neck and I'm operating off of the A that's found at the 14th fret of the 3rd string. The top half here of this pattern is fairly common as well. Most people would know that if they studied scales a little bit. But I've also included a higher A note up here at the 17th fret as another octave. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to bridge the gap between the original area that we had looked at, and I'm going to include more notes up in this region and show you how you can map out a larger area on the upper 3 strings by combining the shapes from one region of the fretboard across to the next region. So let's go to that next diagram. Okay, now we're getting into some mapping that is going on. We have a few notes that were taken from the initial shape that we were looking at more or less in that 5th position area. We've combined that with some notes now that are in between the areas, and then of course there were the upper pitches that we looked at in our second diagram that we were examining. So now we have a limited number of notes. Of course, I could have also selected more tones from that initial pattern we looked at, but I grabbed a few, I moved in between with some, and we also have those that were at the top of the neck. And again, just want to reiterate that I'm looking at the top 3 guitar strings here primarily right now, but you can do this in any way that you wish. And what's fun about it is you'll discover different ways of laying the patterns out, different things that feel interesting under your own fingers. Patterns of playing that that you're used to will tend to come out easier, and hopefully that means more interesting guitar licks that are also better suited to your own personal playing style. So of course, doing this, it is handy to have a working knowledge of all the in-position patterns, but you can tell you can also learn the guitar fretboard very easily using scale mapping in much more of an along the neck fashion as well, rather than being so in position, working very vertically. So what we're going to do next is head to the guitar and start putting some of this information to good use.
So before we get started, I'd like to restate how important that I believe it is for players to first make a very good study of all their scales in position before doing work along the neck with these scale maps. Now, that said, if we begin with the initial pattern I'd shown off of the A minor in 5th position, we can think of how this shape can connect with another in a separate location upon the neck. That was that one, looked like this. And then what we'll do is we'll bridge the gap between both the patterns while limiting the region to keep things more manageable. Now in our case, we're going to be beginning from this 5th position layout. And we're setting our sights on creating the scale map out toward the 12th position with our highest pitch being at 17th fret. So now that we've established our point A to point B relationship, we can go ahead filling in the areas in between for our regions. And by limiting our workspace, for us in this example, it's one of mapping under the 4th guitar string, mapping from the 5th to all the way to the 17th fret, we end up with a nice balance between a sense of the freedom to explore the region, with also a boundary to keep us from feeling like we're getting perhaps too overextended. So when you go to practice this, just basically noodle through the position and really pay attention for anything that feels really cool under your fingers, and of course any kinds of interesting melodic statements that you might make. So work within the region, try coming up with your own patterns, and above all else, put shapes that you like into compositions, or establish the ones you like as pre-learned licks or lines for improvisational playing. And when you find ideas that you like, commit them to memory quickly before you perhaps forget them. Well, over time, through practicing the scale patterns, using a metronome, using jam tracks, making loops, songwriting, and of course improvising, scales will eventually become like second nature on the guitar neck. It might take a while. Some players with high expectations for excellence might feel that it takes them years to really get to where they want to be. And by incorporating an approach like mapping scales and limiting the region of your layouts as you do so, as we did in our examples, the results of this practice will get your fingers playing in many more locations and also some interesting note groupings, so that down the line your playing becomes much more unique, and the musical lines that you develop will favor the manner in which you prefer to play the scales upon the guitar fretboard. Anyway, once again, that's about all the time I have for today. As always, thanks for watching. Have yourself a great week, and I'll catch up with you next time. Bye for now.